I think we are almost live on, or live on everywhere. Yeah, we're gonna be watching the FOMC today. Yeah, let's see what they got to say. Should be starting in like 1 minute. And do we have this going out to X? Is this going out on X? It's not. Now it is. Should be. Alright. Looking over here. It's gonna be like a live reaction to this. Let's go FOMC! Yeah. Yeah, so if you're watching on TikTok, you can see like a little banner that says that we're building up our DeFi portfolio for events. Just gotta make sure you mention that. This thing we're doing, trying to build in public. Oh, it's starting! Oh my god, it's starting!
And stable US
Is this like a commercial?
Across the United States, the Federal Reserve, through its Federal Reserve Education Program, also helps people understand how the economy works, so consumers have the tools to make sound financial decisions.
Wow.
Through this education program, teachers have access to classroom-ready online resources for students from kindergarten to college. Videos, classroom lessons, online education, publications, and more. These resources are all free for educators to use in their lesson plans, or as they see fit. Many of the Federal Reserve System's regional reserve banks, located in 12 districts across the nation, also offer in-person and online professional development that allows educators to deepen their knowledge and hone their craft when it comes to economics, personal finance, and more. Students, too, can take advantage of in-person opportunities by taking tours of exhibits in many of the 12 Federal Reserve banks around the country. Whether a student visits with their family or a school group,
it's good information
they
for
get
people
an
that don't know
in-depth
that
look
there's
at how the
different
Federal
banks.
Reserve works to promote a healthy, sustainable U.S. economy.
Yeah, this is the
At
Federal
the
Reserve.
board and reserve banks, students also get hands-on opportunities like internships and participation on student boards, which introduce them to key economics concepts and potential careers in economics and finance. Consumers are empowered to make sound financial decisions through the availability of easy-to-understand resources that explain personal finance concepts, the broader economy, and the Federal Reserve's role in it. Federal Reserve Education is committed to equipping educators, educating students, and empowering consumers when it comes to understanding and participating in our evolving economy. For more information, visit federalreserveeducation.org to find links to resources and Reserve Bank programs offered near you, and follow Federal Reserve Education on Twitter at @FedEconEd.
What is the Fed?
So what is the Fed?
What is the Fed?
What is the Fed? The Federal Reserve, often referred to as the Fed, is the central bank of the United States.
Congress created the Fed in 1913 to help promote a safe and sound monetary and financial system for our nation.
The Fed includes the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C., which has 7 members, including the chairman and vice chairman.
All of the members of the board are appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the United States Senate.
The Fed also includes 12 regional Federal Reserve banks located in cities throughout the country.
The reserve banks serve as the central bank's operating arms and also gather economic information from all over the country
to help the Fed both
so why are we paying attention to this?
And get
this
the
is an
broad
event
input
that
necessary.
happens, right? This happens almost monthly, right? Sometimes they skip a month. I forget like how long of a break they can potentially take, but I know that sometimes they skip a month. And they basically, the Federal Reserve, or FOMC, Fed Open something committee, something like that. Anyways, they determine monetary policy in terms of like interest rates. So they're probably saying this throughout this if you haven't caught that so far.
That promote maximum employment,
and stable prices.
High levels of employment provide people.
Here, we'll go back. We'll roll
One
back
of the
a
Fed's
little bit.
most
They can probably say-
recognizable functions is conducting U.S. monetary policy,
which involves influencing interest rates and the availability of money and credit in our economy.
Exactly.
Congress has tasked the Fed with implementing monetary policies that promote maximum employment and stable prices.
High levels of employment provide people with more economic opportunities and stable prices, promote growth
by making it easier for households and businesses to plan for the future.
Monetary policy decisions of the Fed are made by the Federal Open Market Committee,
which includes all 7 members of the Board of Governors and presidents from the reserve banks.
This committee meets regularly to assess the conditions and outlook for the economy. In addition to conducting monetary policy, the Federal Reserve also helps to supervise.
They're really stealing my thunder here.
A stable financial system for consumers, communities, and businesses.
The Fed also works with communities,
Sorry.
nonprofit organizations,
Sorry,
and others across
bro.
the nation to address housing
Front
problems,
runner.
low people access to credit, and advance economic and community development.
Renor.
The Fed also promotes stability in the financial system, because instability in the financial system poses a severe threat to the broader economy and communities across the nation.
The Fed also acts as a bank to other banks by clearing checks, making electronic payments, and providing the currency that Americans need to use every day.
Our nation's economy and financial system face constant challenges.
The Fed is working every day to address those challenges and is committed to helping foster good economic conditions and outcomes. Employment opportunities, stable prices, and financial stability that benefit all Americans.
Man, there's no way they got that far ahead of us.
And we are also the Fed.
Whoa!
To learn more about the Federal Reserve, you'll find a wide range of resources on the Board of Governors website at federalreserve.gov.
No, it's like an interesting topic if you were not aware the Federal Reserve existed or what it is, all this stuff. It's like, oh, I had no idea about this large portion of how money works and how prices of things work. It's like a pretty important thing. I don't know, topic. Organization. Important. And they're late. They probably gave the data in so I should look for the data on this. FOMC. The data probably came out, and then 15 minutes or so in, they usually do whatchamacallit. I think they start the meeting. So Fed raises benchmarks 25 basis points. Okay, how did the market initially react? We were listening to that video, but the markets have probably reacted already. Let's see what it looks like in the last hour. Is it bullish or bearish? I mean, at least it's bullish. It even went over 0.61. I don't know. Let's see. It was struggling to get 0.6. So, it's really good that it's made kind of bullish, yeah. Initially bullish. The market's pump. The market's pump. We'll see. So this is the initial response. Then Jerome will start talking. Or is this the time to get those shorts in? Is this the time to get that short in? Look at the overall crypto bubbles. See what's happening out there. What's happening? I want to switch this up to the hourly. Over the last hour, it's a pump. If you put money in, it's up 1%. Almost across the board. There's some people that are lagging behind. They got 0.3% boosty doos. The top players, Ethereum, lagging behind, but it's altcoins that are seeing all the juice right now. Altcoins look jazzed up. It's nice. Where's Phantom at these days? I'm just curious. Curious. Another rapper. guess I should keep this chart up, see if it's gonna keep going higher, or if it's gonna start to go low, or if it's gonna start to go low. It can't go no higher. Yeah, today that was a horrible song that I decided to sing you. Today I think its max has been around 1860. I'm saying like 72. I was like, over 72 is looking pretty bullish. It's like, boom, I'm taking off. I'm ready for the next target. That's around 1900. So that's what I'm looking to see if that happens or not. If it do, I bought some ETH yesterday. I don't know. What is something just a little 62. Man. Mr. Rome should be on in like about 5 minutes. Look at this fake out there. Oh, it says 2:30 for the watch. Oh my god, it's 21 minutes. The fake out, bro. The pump fake. You just release the thing and then here you go on this. But the markets seem to be. I don't know, the markets are loving it. ETH increasing. I mean, I gotta read some of these other people's opinions just to see what some other markets are. For me, ambition is still above the Fed's 2%. Personal consumption changes and figures the Fed uses a measure of progress in its fight against raising prices. However, some economists say July's rate hike will be the last one of this cycle, citing progress on inflation and a slowing economy. Is what they got to say, what they give us off of this. Near the Federal Reserve unanimously raised interest rates by 0.25% point to 22-year high. That was the statement that changes. The last rate hike of the cycle should be looking at what to expect from rates going forward. I mean, if Jerome says this is the last, then it'll be kind of ridiculously bullish. One thing. Man, ETH's still going up, bro. Just climb. bullish for the market. Oh my god, it's just gonna run. It's running. Off to the races. Off to the races. Everybody's like, it's over. The tightening is over. Like I think that's like the sentiment right now. Unless Jerome like gets on the mic and says something else, I think that is just the general sentiment. It's just like the tightening is over. That's as bad as it was gonna get, or like this next, like we gotta survive like 2-3 months. And it's usually October. Nice early December. My goodness. Yeah, I have a little head short going. Good thing I bought that ETH yesterday because I gotta close this thing. Yeah, so I'm taking a little. I guess I'm supposed to like hold the 2.5. The resistance of the day, though. Oh no. Did it really spike the wall? It broke my target when I spiked. Wanna see that? I don't know. Is it gonna be a scam lick? Is that a scam lick? Oh my god, that fall off. The incredible fall off of this wick. I need a chart to show you guys like what's happening. I imagine it's happening on Bitcoin too. I'm watching ETH. If I don't see it in Bitcoin, I'll go to ETH. It's a trading view chart. See something like, I was gonna say like 30 minute. It's still like crazy for a 30-minute chart to look like that. But you can watch it like closer like this. What it's doing by the minute. Down here, this is support. Are we gonna bounce? Put your chips, are we gonna bounce? If it doesn't bounce, they're gonna play down here for a bit. We could play lower. Oh, is this candle going to keep this entire one up? It does. Expect that second candle maybe do the exact same. Continue in this direction. Go on. This is the 1 minute too. Usually when I'm playing with 1 minute candles, I like to use. I don't know if I can even change them in this type of mode. I like to change them to Heikenachis though. But in this case, it's fine that we just have like a by the minute thing. We're not doing much with it anyways. Alright, it might have just been scammed, which might have been a little play with people's hearts. The market might come down after this, push it up really quick, get everybody to jump in, think it's really gonna run, and then turn it down, take it down. You got a few months. That's plenty of time. I don't know, we'll see. So far, all these rooms have just been losing. It's like really the players are in control on the short time frame. But that's also this huge pump. Everybody wants to like maybe just a sell-off. Because the news is kind of bullish. I think the news is kind of bullish. If, and it seems like maybe that last portion, the if, is just kind of rumor, which is like if it's bullish. The if is if this is the last rate hike of this tightening season or cycle. If this is actually the last rate hike, like yeah, people gotta hang on. But then you're like, yo, it's about to get a lot juicier in here. What comes after the tightening? Pause. I mean, it could just be pause, or eventually the next thing you see would probably be the easy. Not easy, just pause. I guess it doesn't have to be like or tightening too easy, whatever. Maybe we'll get that stagflation they've been talking about. See what that's like. Basis points to 5.2555, the highest level in 22 years, and kept the door open to another rate hike, so potentially one more, and it didn't change its economic outlook in any significant manner. The focus now is just the Fed Chair Powell's press conference, particularly on how open the door is for a September hike. And again, even if it goes up in September, that means for show this year. Probably for show this year, where you're getting in October. Is this just the time to accumulate tokens? I don't know. I think maybe this is token accumulation. We got 10 votes, 50% pump, 50% dump. Really? How can this be? It's going to come down to this press conference. In general, it's like market shouldn't be too happy about it, but the market's been happier on just slowdowns and stuff. Like the market didn't exactly treat the I'm going to push this around one more time. The market didn't exactly treat the previous rate hikes as bearish. It's kind of bearish. 2 days later, we going up. Like, what's gonna happen 2 days later this time? right. Does it pay to be a bear? Actually, let me make sure that, okay, let's do this thing. Does it pay to be a bear today? Man, not so far. No, it's not. Alright, Jerome got about 1 minute to come in here and ruin everybody's day or sauce it up. It's about to go down. And if you're on X today, aka Twitter, bro, if you out here talking about earlians,
Good afternoon. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. We understand the hardship that high inflation is causing, and we remain strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve. Without price stability, the economy doesn't work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. Since early last year, the FOMC has significantly tightened the stance of monetary policy. Today, we took another step by raising our policy interest rate a 1/4 percentage point, and we are continuing to reduce our securities holdings at a brisk pace. We've covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our tightening have yet to be felt. Looking ahead, we will continue to take a data-dependent approach in determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate. I'll have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has been expanding at a moderate pace. Growth in consumer spending appears to have slowed from earlier in the year. Although activity in the housing sector has picked up somewhat, it remains well below levels of a year ago, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. And higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. The labor market remains very tight. Over the past 3 months, job gains averaged 244,000 jobs per month, a pace below that seen earlier in the year, but still a strong pace. The unemployment rate remains low at 3.6%. There are some continuing signs that supply and demand in the labor market are coming into better balance. The labor force participation rate has moved up since last year, particularly for individuals aged 25 to 54 years. Nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, and job vacancies have declined so far this year. While the jobs to workers gap has narrowed, labor demand still substantially exceeds the supply of available workers. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%. Over the 12 months ending in May, total PCE prices rose 3.8%. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 4.6%. In June, the 12-month change in the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, came in at 3.0%, and the change in the core CPI was 4.8%. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year. Nonetheless, the process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher cost of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We're highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning to inflation to our 2% objective. At today's meeting, the committee raised the target range for the federal funds rate by 1/4 percentage point, bringing the target range to 5.25% to 5.5%. We are also continuing the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. With today's action, we've raised our policy rate by 5.25 percentage points since early last year. We have been seeing the effects of our policy tightening on demand in the most interest rate sensitive sectors of the economy, particularly housing and investment. It will take time, however, for the full effects of our ongoing monetary restraint to be realized, especially on inflation. In addition, the economy is facing headwinds from tighter credit conditions for households and businesses, which are likely to weigh on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. In determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting based on the totality of the incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation, as well as the balance of risks. We remain committed to bringing inflation back to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a period of below-trend growth and some softening of labor market conditions. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Yeah, let's get to the questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You have, I think, a couple times in your opening remarks talked about this language in determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate. Should we take that to mean that additional hikes are likely on the way? And should we also believe that all future meetings, say September and November, are live, or are you in a every other meeting mode? Thank you.
So we haven't made a decision to go to every other meeting. It's not something we've looked at. We're going to be going meeting by meeting, and as we go into each meeting, we're going to be asking ourselves the same question. So we haven't made any decisions about any future meetings, including the pace at which we'd consider hiking. But we're going to be assessing the need for further tightening that may be appropriate. You read the language, to return inflation to 2% over time. I would say that the intermeeting data came in broadly in line with expectations. Economic activity remained resilient. Job creation remained strong while cooling a bit. And the June CPI report actually came in a bit better than expectations for a change. And the June CPI report, of course, was welcome, but it's only one report, 1 month's data. We hope that inflation will follow a lower path it will be consistent with the CPI reading, but we don't know that, and we're just going to need to see more data. So what are we going to be looking at? Really, it will be the whole broader picture, and starting with we're looking for moderate growth, right? We're looking for supply and demand through the economy coming into better balance, including in particular in the labor market. We'll be looking at inflation, and we'll be asking ourselves, does this whole collection of data, do we assess it as suggesting that we need to raise rates further? And if we make that conclusion, then we will go ahead and raise rates. So that's how we're thinking about the next meeting, and how we're thinking about meetings going forward potentially. But we're now mainly thinking about the next meeting. I will also say, since we're talking about it, between now and the September meeting, we get 2 more job reports, 2 more CPI reports. I think we have an ECI report coming later this week, which is Employment Compensation Index, and lots of data on economic activity. All of that information is going to inform our decision as we go into that meeting. I would say it is certainly possible that we would raise funds again at the September meeting if the data warranted. And I would also say it's possible that we would choose to hold steady at that meeting. We're going to be making careful assessments, as I said, meeting by meeting. And I'll close by saying we've raised the federal funds rate now by 525 basis points since March 2022. Monetary policy, we believe, is restrictive and is putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation.
If I could just briefly follow up on something you said there. You said the data in the intermediate period, it broadly came in line with expectations.
You got to read between
the lines. Does that mean there's unlikely to have been a change in the overwhelming outlook of the committee that 2 more hikes are necessary?
I'm just going to go back to what I said. That's the question. We have 8 weeks now until the September meeting, and all that data that I recited, we're going to be looking at all of that and making that assessment then. And it really, we did have the one good reading, and of course we welcome that, but it's just one reading, as everybody knows. And we've seen this before in the data. Many forecasts call for rates for inflation to remain low, but we just don't know that until we see the data. So we'll be focusing on that.
Gina. Thank you. Thanks for taking our questions, Chair Powell. Obviously, you upgraded the language around growth in the statement today. We've seen the Barbie movie numbers. We've seen everyone going to Taylor Swift concerts this summer. It seems like the American consumer is in pretty good shape. And it does seem like growth is sort of picking back up a little bit, or at least doing well. And I wonder, from your perspective, if that continues, if we see growth not just stabilizing, but performing well this summer, is that a problem because it's inflationary, or is it good news because it suggests that a soft landing is more likely? Just how are you thinking about that sort of trajectory?
Yeah, so I would say it this way. The overall resilience of the economy, the fact that we've been able to achieve disinflation so far without any meaningful negative impact on the labor market, the strength of the economy, overall, that's a good thing. It's good to see that, of course. It's also, you see consumer confidence coming up and things like that. That will support activity going forward. But you're right, though. At the margin, stronger growth could lead over time to higher inflation, and that would require an appropriate response from monetary policy. So we'll be watching that carefully and seeing how it evolves over time.
Neil.
Thanks, Chair Powell. Neil Irwin from Axios. So as you referenced earlier, in the intermeeting period, soft CPI, jobs reports, still strong but moderating, JOLTS looked good. So if you're data dependent, why not pause again? Why not stay on hold? Why not take another meeting off when the data was at least cutting in the direction you want to see?
So if you go back to what we're trying to do here, we're trying to achieve a stance of policy that's sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to 2%. At the last meeting, we wrote down our individual estimates of what that would take, and the median of that was an additional 2 rate hikes. So I would say we looked at the intermeeting data, and as I mentioned, broadly consistent, not perfectly consistent, but broadly consistent with expectations, and as a result, we went ahead and took another step. And that's a labor market that continues to be strong, but gradually slowing. I mentioned that the inflation report was actually a little better than expected, but we're going to be careful about taking too much signal from a single reading. And growth came in stronger than expected. So that's how we look at it, and so we did take that step today.
Nick.
Nick Timmeros of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, markets widely believe the median FOMC participants' inflation forecast from June for the fourth quarter of this year will be too high, given autos and shelter, and that by September that may warrant a downward revision in the inflation forecast of 20 to 30 basis points. Would that type of inflation progress be enough to hold rates steady from here, or do you need to see below-trend growth and decelerating labor income growth to be convinced that you've done enough?
So it's hard to pick the pieces apart and say, how much of this and how much of that. We'll be looking at everything. And, of course, we'll be looking to see whether the signal from June CPI is replicated or the opposite of replicated, or whether it's somewhere in the middle. We'll be looking at the growth data. We'll be looking at the labor market data very closely, of course, and making an overall judgment about that. It's the totality of the data, I think, but with a particular focus on making progress on inflation.
If I could follow up, last month you said there were benefits to moderating the pace of increases because it would give you more information to make decisions. would another CPI report like the one we just had in June allow you to at least maintain that slower pace and defer until the fall any decision on whether you need that second rate hike?
So I'm just going to tell you again what we're going to do in September. We're going to look at 2 additional job reports, 2 additional CPI reports, lots of activity data, and that's what we're going to look at, and we're going to make that decision then. And that decision could mean another hike in September, or it could mean that we decide to maintain at that level. And again, the question we're going to be asking ourselves is the overall signal one that we need to do more, that we need to tighten further? And if we get that signal whenever we get it, then, and that's the collective judgment of the committee, then we will move ahead. If we don't, then we'll have the option of maintaining policy at that level. But it's really dependent so much on the data, and we just don't have it yet.
Chris.
Hi, Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. So consumer confidence in the economy is rising, likely in large part because of the declines in headline inflation. You also see wages are also rising faster than prices now, after trailing them for a long time. How much are Americans truly harmed by inflation at its current level, headline level of 3%? And with that in mind, when do you put some weight back on the employment side of the dual mandate?
So I guess I'd say it this way. First, it is a good thing that headline inflation has come down so much, because that's really what the public experiences. And I would say that having headline inflation move down that much almost creates it will strengthen the broad sense that the public has that inflation is coming down, which will in turn, we hope, help inflation continue to move down. So you were really, sorry, but what your question was?
Well, I mean, you've talked for many press conferences now about the harm created by inflation, how hard it is for people. So how much of that are we still seeing with inflation now down at 3?
So I guess I would put it this way. I'd say it this way. It's really a question of how do you balance the 2 risks, the risk of doing too much or doing too little. And, I would say that, we're coming to a place where there really are risks on both sides. It's hard to say exactly whether they're in balance or not, but as our stances become more restrictive and inflation moderates, we do increasingly face that risk. But we need to see that inflation is durably down that far. As you know, we think, and most economists think, that core inflation is actually a better signal of where headline inflation is going, because headline inflation is affected greatly by volatile energy and food prices. So we would want core inflation to be coming down, because that's what we think core is signaling where headline's going to go in the future. And core inflation is still pretty elevated. There's reason to think it can come down now, but it's still quite elevated. And so we think we need to stay on task, and we think we're going to need to certainly hold policy at a restricted levels for some time, and we need to be prepared to raise further if we think that's appropriate.
Well, and then if inflation were to, just a quick follow, if it stays at 3 or drops even a little bit more, I mean, how much of an increase in unemployment do you think is acceptable to get that last bit of inflation? People are talking about the potential difficulty of the so-called last mile of inflation. So, but how much unemployment do you think is justified to get down that last?
So it is a very positive thing that actually the unemployment rate is the same as it was when we lifted off in March of 22 at 3.6%. So that's a real blessing, and that we've been able to achieve some disinflation. And we don't seek to, it's not that we're aiming to raise unemployment, but I would just say the historical record, we have to be honest about the historical record, which does suggest that when central banks go in and slow the economy to bring down inflation, the result tends to be some softening in labor market conditions. And so that is still the likely outcome here. And we hope that that's as little as possible. We have to be honest that is the likely outcome. The worst outcome for everyone, of course, would be not to deal with inflation now, not get it done. Whatever the short-term social costs of getting inflation under control, the longer-term social costs of failing to do so are greater, and that the historical record is very, very clear on that. If you go through a period where inflation expectations are not anchored, inflation is volatile, it interferes with people's lives and with economic activity, and that's the thing we really need to avoid and will avoid.
Go to Michael McKee.
At this point, you say the policy is restrictive, but all year long we have seen growth surprise to the upside, unemployment to the downside, and inflation lately to the downside. So I'm wondering, by definition, should you be restrictive enough right now under these conditions? Do you think you might need to do more? Because I'm curious about what you see as inflation dynamics now. Is the economy still moving in a direction where it creates more inflation? People talk about base effects and higher energy costs, and now we have some large labor settlements. Or is the economy disinflating, and you're able to go back to the old Fed policy of opportunistic disinflation?
So I'll just say, again, the broader picture of what we want to see is we want to see easing of supply constraints and normalization of pandemic-related distortions to demand and supply. We want to see economic growth running at moderate or modest levels to help ease inflationary pressures. We want to see continued restoration of supply and demand balance, particularly in the labor market, and all of that should lead to declining inflationary pressures. Now, what we see is those pieces of the puzzle coming together, and we're seeing evidence of those things now. But I would say that what our eyes are telling us is that policy has not been restrictive enough for long enough to have its full desired effects. So we intend, again, to keep policy restrictive until we're confident that inflation is coming down sustainably toward our 2% target, and we're prepared to further tighten if that is appropriate. And we think the process, still probably has a long way to go.
Well, do you think under current conditions you are restrictive enough unless something changes?
Well, I think we think today's rate hike was appropriate, and I think we're going to be looking at the incoming data to inform our decision at the next meeting about is the incoming data telling us that we need to do more, and if it does tell us that collectively, if that's our view, then we will do more.
Colby. Thank you. Colby Smith with the Financial Times. If September is in fact a live meeting, how does that square with the need for a more gradual tightening pace that you spoke of last month in explaining the rationale for holding the funds rate steady at the June meeting?
So a more gradual pace doesn't go immediately to every other meeting. It could be 2 out of 3 meetings, right? It just means if you're slowing down. The point really was to slow down the decision cycle as we get closer and closer to, we think, our destination. And I wouldn't want to go automatically to every other meeting because I just don't think I think it's not an environment where we want to provide a lot of forward guidance. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. We just want to keep moving at what we think is the right pace. And I do think it makes all the sense in the world to slow down as we now make these finally judged decisions. And so that's what we did. And so I think it's possible, I mentioned before, it's possible that we would move at consecutive meetings. We're not taking that off the table, or we might not. It's really going to depend on what the data tell us. That's the best we can do.
So we shouldn't assume that every other meeting is the lowest tightening frequency, let's say. It could be, longer intervals in between as well.
I think we're going to look. I think we're going to make a decision about the next meeting, and then we're going to make a decision about the one after that. And I think it'll sort itself out.
Thanks. Howard Schneider with Reuters. Among your colleagues, there have been people who've said they feel that very little transmission has taken place so far from monetary policy into the economy, and there are those who feel, they say, it's happened very fast this time and it's kind of up to date. Where are you on that continuum?
So there's a long-running debate about the lags between changes in financial conditions and the response to those changes from economic activity and inflation, right? So we know that in the modern era, financial conditions move in anticipation of our decisions, and that has clearly been the case in this cycle. So in a sense, the clock starts earlier than it used to, but that doesn't necessarily change the process from that point on, and it's not clear that it has. I'll tell you what we know and then what we don't know. We know that financial conditions affect economic activity and inflation with a lag that can be long and variable, or lags, plural, that can be long and variable. A lot of uncertainty around the length of the lags, and by the way, that's just one component of the broader uncertainty that we face. So I'll tell you how I think about this. The first thing to say is we're determined to bring inflation down to 2% over time, and we will use our tools to do that. No one should doubt that. I would look at it this way, though. The real federal funds rate is now in meaningfully positive territory. If you take the nominal federal funds rate, subtract a mainstream estimate of near-term inflation expectations, you get a real federal funds rate that is well above most estimates of the longer-term neutral rate. So I would say monetary policy is restrictive, more so after today's decision, meaning that it is putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation. We'll keep monetary policy restrictive until we think it's not appropriate to do so. So that's how I think about it. I mean, if I sum it up, I would say we've come a long way. We are resolutely committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal over time. Inflation has proved, repeatedly, has proved stronger than we and other forecasters have expected. And at some point that may change. We have to be ready to follow the data, and given how far we've come, we can afford to be a little patient as well as resolute as we let this unfold.
On the credit side, I'm wondering if you saw anything in the latest SLOOS data that made you think you're getting a quantum of credit contraction beyond what you'd expect. The bank lending data really is, the growth rates edging down towards and below, heading below zero, which is usually a recession indicator.
So I guess the SLOOS will come out early next week, and I would just say it's broadly consistent with what you would expect. You've got lending conditions tight and getting a little tighter. You've got weak demand, and it gives a picture of pretty tight credit conditions in the economy. I think it's really hard to tease out how much of that is from this source or that source, but I think what matters is the overall picture is of tight and tightening lending conditions, and that's what this SLOOS will say.
Rachel. Hi, Chair Powell. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Thanks for taking our questions. Could you break down the reasons why inflation has fallen and what share of that credit you would give to factors that don't stem directly from rate hikes or that might be within your control at all, like easing supply chains and a drop in energy prices over the past year?
Yeah. So, interesting question. So, let me start by saying that the inflation surge that we saw in the pandemic resulted from a collision of elevated demand and constrained supply, both of which followed from the unprecedented features of the pandemic and the response from fiscal and monetary policy. And we've always expected that the disinflationary process would stem from both from the normalization of those broad pandemic-related supply and demand conditions and from restrictive monetary policy, which would help return the balance between supply and demand by restraining demand. And we think that's broadly what we're seeing. So to go break it down a little further, of course, headline inflation has come down sharply from elevated levels as energy and food prices have come down, mostly due to reversal of the effects from the war in Ukraine. And that's a good thing, and the public experiences that, as I mentioned earlier. For core inflation, I'd say there has been a role for both factors, both that I mentioned. Clearly, for goods, normalization of supply conditions is playing an important role, as is the beginning of the reversal of spending back into services and away from goods. Take autos as an example. The combination of an increase in sales and inventories, while vehicle inflation has decelerated, points to a substantial role for supply. But there's also a role for demand, as the loans and things like that are more expensive. So they're both working there. Housing services inflation now starts to move down. Clearly, higher rates have slowed the housing market. I would say monetary policy is working about as we expect, and we think it'll play an important role going forward, in particular in non-housing services, where really we think that's where the labor market will come in as a very, very important factor. So we think both of those sources of disinflation are playing an important role.
I see. And just to follow up, do you think that of those two sources, that core will rely more heavily on seeing an impact from rate hikes, or is there a more even split there too?
I think monetary policy is going to be important going forward, because we're sort of reaping now the benefits of the reversal of some of the very specific pandemic things. We're seeing that with goods in particular, with supply chains and shortages moving, and we're seeing. So I think going forward, monetary policy will be important, particularly in the sector, in the non-housing services sector.
Edward.
Thank you, Chair Powell. First, let me compliment your tie, the choice of tie. So thanks for taking our question. So the Beige Book, it said, input cost pressures remain elevated for services firms, but eased notably for manufacturing sector. Is that an indication that there's a wage inflation pressure? And how do you target and pressure on the wage inflation without pushing the economy into recession?
I think as it relates to goods, it's really an indication that supply chains and shortages are easing. And so what was the first part of it?
So wage inflation, like how do you target wage inflation without pushing an economy into a recession?
I don't think we're targeting wage inflation. I think what we're looking for is a broad cooling in labor market conditions, and that's what we're seeing. So wages have actually been gradually moving down. They're still at levels that would be consistent over a long period of time with 2% inflation. Nonetheless, we're making progress there. And by so many indicators, labor market demand is cooling. You can look at surveys by workers and businesses who see that. You can look at the quits rate normalizing. You can look at job openings coming down. You can look at just job creation in the establishment survey has, it's still at a high level, but it was at really an extraordinarily high level for most of the last 2 years. So you see cooling, particularly in private sector in the last, in the last report. So I think we see that, and it's happening at a gradual pace. So that's actually not a bad thing in a sense, because if what we see is a labor market, very strong demand for labor, which is really the engine of the economy. People are getting hired, many people going back to work, getting wages, spending money, and that's really what's driving the economy. But that it's gradually slowing, it's gradually cooling. That's a good prescription for getting where we want to get.
But still, we see a push to raise minimum wage. We're seeing a lot of unions go on strike or threaten strike, and the common thing is they come out with agreements like big pay increases, like UPS, and we have the auto workers coming up. Are you concerned then about a trend of series of big unions, these contract pushing wage inflation then?
Not for us to comment on contract negotiations. Not our job, not our role. We monitor these things and we'll keep an eye on them. But really, that's something that's handled at that level. And not,
Victoria. Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. I wanted to ask about the SEP, which suggests that you would cut rates as overall and core PCE get to around or under 3%. And so I'm wondering, is the level of inflation what's sort of important there as you think about getting to 2% and when you might start cutting rates? Or is the speed at which inflation is falling also important?
I think you'd take both into account. I think you'd take everything into account when you start cutting rates. It would depend on a wide range of things. And when people are writing down rate cuts next year, it just is a sense that inflation is coming down and we're comfortable that it's coming down and it's time to start cutting rates. I think, but I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty between what happens, in the next meeting cycle, let alone the next year, let alone the year after that. So it's hard to say exactly what happens there, what's motivating people.
So if it's sort of stubbornly in maybe the high twos, you wouldn't necessarily cut rates?
I'm not saying that at all. I'm not giving you any numerical guidance around that. I'm saying we'd be comfortable cutting rates when we're comfortable cutting rates, and that won't be this year, I don't think. It would be, many people wrote down rate cuts for next year. I think the median was several for next year, and that's just going to be a judgment that we have to make then, a full year from now, and it'll be about how confident we are that inflation is in fact coming down to our 2% goal.
A good part of Wall Street has become more confident that the Fed is going to be able to engineer a soft landing, and they've reduced their forecast for recession. And I'm wondering if the staff has changed its view on the likelihood of recession being likely, and if you personally have changed your view in terms of becoming more confident that you can achieve a soft landing.
So it has been my view consistently that we do have a shot, and my base case is that we will be able to achieve inflation moving back down to our target without the kind of really significant downturn that results in high levels of job losses that we've seen in some past instances, many past instances of tightening that look like ours. That's been my view. That's still my view. And I think, that's sort of consistent with what I see today. So, but it's a long way from assured, and we have a lot left to go to see that happen. So the staff now has a noticeable slowdown in growth starting later this year in the forecast, but given the resilience of the economy recently, they are no longer forecasting a recession. I just want to note that that our staff produces its own forecast, which is independent of the forecast that we, as FOMC participants, produce. Having an independent staff forecast, as well as the individual participant forecast, is really a strength of our process. There's just a lot of, I think, constructive diversity of opinion that helps us make, informs our deliberations, helps us make, I hope, better decisions.
And is the reason for optimism that inflation has come down and you still have a strong labor market? I mean, does that add to the optimism?
I wouldn't use the term optimism about this yet. I would say, though, that there's a pathway. And yes, that's a good way to think about it. We've seen so far the beginnings of disinflation without any real costs in the labor market, and that's a really good thing. I would just also say the historical record suggests that there's very likely to be some softening in labor market conditions, and consistent with having a soft landing, you would have some softening in labor market conditions, and that's still likely as we go forward with this process. But it's a good thing to date that we haven't really seen that. We've seen softening through not through unemployment, not through higher unemployment. We've seen softening through job openings coming down part of the way back to more normal levels. The quits rate, so people are not quitting as much. We've seen participation, people coming in, and so labor supply has improved, which has lowered the temperature in the labor market, which was quite overheated, going back a year or so. So we're seeing that kind of cooling, and that's very healthy, and we hope it continues.
Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Cox from CNBC.com. You and other Fed officials in the past have suggested that you don't need to keep hiking until inflation hits 2%, that as long as you see continued progress. So I'm wondering, how close do you need to get with the inflation numbers coming down? How many months of data do you need to see that will give you sufficient confidence? And how far does this fight need to go before you're willing to kind of declare victory on it?
So the idea that we would keep hiking until inflation gets to 2%, it would be a prescription of going way past the target. That's clearly not the appropriate way to think about it. So. In effect, if you look at our forecasts, the median participant, and again, these are forecasting out years, so take them with a grain of salt, but people are cutting rates next year because the federal funds rate is at a restrictive level now. So if we see inflation coming down credibly, sustainably, then we don't need to be at a restrictive level anymore. We can move back to a neutral level, and then below a neutral level at a certain point. I think we of course would be very careful about that. We'd really want to be sure that inflation is coming down in a sustainable level. And it's hard to make, I'm not going to try to make a numerical assessment of when and where that would be, but that's the way I would think about it, is you'd stop raising long before you got to 2% inflation, and you'd start cutting before you got to 2% inflation too, because we don't see ourselves getting to 2% inflation until, all the way back to 2 until 2025 or so. So.
Jennifer.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Jennifer Schonberger with Yahoo Finance. It's been over 4 months since a handful of regional banks, including Silicon Valley Bank, failed. When you look at credit conditions now, given Banc of California's acquisition of PacWest, does this acquisition suggest the full impact has not been felt, or are you comfortable saying that we've seen most of the ripple effects that may have occurred at this point, and how does this play into your outlook for policy?
So I don't want to comment on any particular merger proposal, but I will say things have settled down for sure out there. Deposit flows have stabilized, capital and liquidity remain strong, aggregate bank lending was stable quarter over quarter and is up significantly year over year. banking sector profits generally are coming in strong this quarter, and overall the banking system remains strong and resilient. Of course, we're still watching the situation carefully and monitoring conditions in the banking sector. In terms of the actual effect on, if you think of a particular set of banks that were affected because of their size and business model and things like that, that were more affected by the turmoil in March than others, it's very hard, as I mentioned, it's very hard to sort of tease out the effects on this very large economy of ours from them tightening. They may be tightening a little bit more, probably are, than other banks. The SLOOS has been telling us for more than a year that banking conditions are tightening. That process is ongoing, and that will restrain economic growth. So I think we have to take a step back from. I can't separate those anymore. I think basically we're just looking at the overall picture, which is one of tightening credit conditions, and that's going to restrain economic activity. It is restraining economic activity. So that's how I would look at it.
And how is that informing your outlook for setting policy?
So I think that is an expected result of tightening interest rate policy, is that bank credit conditions bank lending conditions would tighten as well. And so the question is it more effective this time because of what happened in May? I just don't think we know that. I think we're looking at the current data in GDP, and we're seeing strong spending, we're seeing a strong economy, and it's made us confident that we can go ahead and raise interest rates now for the third time since the March events. It seems like the economy is weathering this well, but of course we're watching it carefully and expect to continue to do that.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thanks for taking our questions. Megan Casella with Barron's. I wondered on wages if you were at all concerned about any inflationary impact of wages now outpacing inflation, which is likely contributing to the boost in consumer sentiment and the continued strength of the consumer that we've been seeing.
Well, wages in excess of inflation means real wages are positive. Again, that's a great thing. Of course, we want that. We want people to have real wages, but we want wages to be going up at a level that's consistent with 2% inflation over time. As I mentioned, nominal wages have been coming down gradually, and that's what we want to see. We expect to see more of that. That's just more of what's consistent over a longer period of time. We don't really think that wages were an important cause of inflation in the first year or so of the outbreak, but I would say that wages are probably an important issue going forward. Labor market conditions broadly are going to be an important part of getting inflation back down, and that's why we think we need some further softening in labor market conditions.
This goes sort of to the balance of risks question, but you mentioned at the start how you're keeping an eye on consumer activity and whether there might be some sort of a rebound there. And I'm curious what the Fed's explanation would be to families if further interest rate hikes start to hit the labor market, start to drive that sentiment back down. What's the message there of why you continue to keep rates elevated or to raise them?
Well, we have a job assigned to us by Congress to get inflation under control, and we think the single most important thing we can do to benefit those very families, especially families at the lower end of the income spectrum, is to get inflation sustainably under control and restore price stability. We think that is the most important thing we can do now, and we're determined to do that. And I would just point out that the people who are the most hurt by inflation right away are people who are on a low fixed income, who, when you're talking about travel, or transportation costs, heating costs, clothing, food, things like that, those, if you're just making it through each month on your paycheck and prices go up, you're in trouble right away. Even middle class people have some resources and can absorb inflation. People in the lower end of the income spectrum have a harder time doing that. So we need to get this done, and the record is clear that if we take too long, or if we don't succeed, that the pain will only be greater. So that's how I would explain what we're doing.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Simon Rabinovich with The Economist. You had said last month that this meeting this week was going to be a live one. In the event, the market had assigned a roughly 99% probability to the rate move that you announced today. The decision was, of course, unanimous. And the statement was basically unchanged from last month. So may I ask, to what extent was the meeting actually a live one? Was there ever any doubt over the past 2 days about what the decision was actually going to be?
Well, I mean, was there doubt? Look, I would say there's a range of views on the committee, and when you see the minutes in 3 weeks, you'll see that. There's a range of views about what we should do at this meeting and what we should do at the next meeting, and it's a process that we go through. Many times when we go into a meeting, the decision is not, fundamentally in doubt. Nonetheless, we have the meeting, and some meetings are less uncertain than others, and I'll just leave it at that.
Evan Reiser, Market News International. Thank you, Chair Powell. Financial conditions have been loosening at a fairly steady clip in recent weeks, the dollar, the stock market, et cetera. What does that mean for the Fed and being sure that inflation will come down to target?
So we monitor, of course, financial conditions, broad financial conditions. You're right, it's the dollar and equities, and we're of course very focused on rates and our own policy. We're going to use our policy tools to working through financial conditions to get inflation under control. The implication is, we will do what it takes to get inflation down, and in principle, that could mean that if financial conditions get looser, we have to do more. But what tends to happen, though, is financial conditions get in and out of alignment with what we're doing, and ultimately, over time, we get where we need to go.
If I could also ask about the SEP from June that showed rate cuts. Do you expect the Fed to cut nominal rates next year while also continuing QT?
So that could happen. The question is, is that consistent with? So if you think about both of them as normalization, imagine it's a world where things are okay, and it's time to bring rates down from what are restrictive levels to more normal levels. Normalization in the case of the balance sheet would be to reduce QT. So. To continue it, you depending on where you are in the cycle. So they're two independent things, and really the active tool of monetary policy is rates. But you can imagine circumstances in which it would be appropriate to have them working in what might be seen to be just different ways, but that wouldn't be the case.
Go to Kyle.
Thanks, Chair Powell. Kyle Campbell with American Banker. I have a question about the discount window. I'm wondering if since the bank failures of the spring, if you've seen signs that banks have taken more steps to be proactive in assuring that they're ready to use that facility if they need to, and if you have any sort of thoughts on whether policies might be appropriate for making sure that banks sort of test regularly to show that they are prepared to use it. Thanks.
So that's a very important thing, yes, and yes to both sides of that. Yes, banks are now working to see that they are ready to use the discount window, and we are strongly encouraging them to do that, banks broadly. We did find, as you know, during the events of March, and that that it's a little clunkier. It can be a little clunkier and not as quick as it needs to be sometimes. So why not be in a situation where you're just much more ready in case you need to access the discount window?
Let's go to Mark.
Mr. Chairman, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. You've talked in the past about getting the housing market back into better balance, excuse me, and also that the market might have bottomed. Where do you see that situation and balance, or lack thereof, right now, particularly with the constrained inventory of existing homes that might otherwise be coming onto market at a time when existing homeowners are reluctant to move? And of course, all of that happening with the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage still around 7% on the heels of Fed tightening, and with what you're talking about, tightening industry lending standards. Are we getting closer to balance or farther away? What's your sense?
I think we've got a ways to go to get back to balance, really for the reasons that you talked about. With existing homes, there are many people who have low-rate mortgages, and whereas they might want to sell in a normal situation. They're not going to because they have so much value in their mortgage, which means that supply of existing homes is really, really tight, which is keeping prices up. On the other hand, there's a lot of supply coming online now, and there are people coming in. A lot of the buyers are first-time buyers coming in at buying it, with these relatively elevated mortgage rates. But I think this will take some time to work through. Hopefully more supply comes online, and we work through it. We're still living through the the aftermath of the pandemic.
You just said we're about to fry these new bugs.
Go to Nancy for the last question.
Hi, Chair Powell. Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. Russia has pulled out of an agreement allowing shipments of grain safe passage through the Black Sea, and alternative routes at this point could be closed off. Just wondering, how could that contribute to higher food prices and inflation generally, and how closely are you watching that?
We are watching it, of course, very closely. And you're right, the withdrawal from the Black Sea Grain Initiative does raise concerns about global food security, particularly for poorer countries that import a large share of their food. Grain prices did go up on this news, but they remain well below their peaks of last spring. And the moves that we've seen so far, I would say, are not expected to make a significant contribution to U.S. inflation. Of course, we will be watching that situation carefully.
So you don't think it would have a big effect on Fed policy at this point?
You wouldn't say so, looking at what we know now.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And that's it. That's what Jerome has to say today. That's Jerome's story. We could do a little song about that. Going down this list of protocols and their revenue, protocols and their fees.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces. My name is Trevor Reeve, and on behalf of the Division of Monetary Affairs at the Federal Reserve Board, I would like to welcome you to the inaugural Thomas Laubach Research Conference. As a highly influential researcher and policy advisor, Thomas Laubach was a beloved figure in the economics and central banking communities. Thomas served as the Director of Monetary Affairs here at the Fed and was a trusted advisor to Fed chairs and the Federal Open Market Committee. And to many of us, he was a close colleague and a dear friend. Today, we are honored to have several current and former Federal Reserve policymakers and senior officials with us, along with many other distinguished guests and friends. I'm grateful that all of you have taken time out of your busy schedules to be with us today, and I would like to extend a special welcome to Tomas's family for being here on this special occasion. Tomas is widely known for his influential research, including his innovative work on the natural rate of interest, which we'll hear more about soon. Thomas saw the value of bringing together researchers and practitioners to further our understanding of the economy and to improve the conduct of monetary policy. In this spirit, today's conference pays tribute to Tomas's lasting contributions and inspires us to carry on his legacy. In conjunction with this conference, and to advance Thomas's passion for promoting research excellence, the Division of Monetary Affairs established the Thomas Laubach Research Award. The annual award recognizes important contributions to the monetary policy literature from Federal Reserve System staff. Yesterday, we were pleased to celebrate the inaugural recipient of the award, Kurt Lunsford from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. Kurt's paper, Policy Language and Information Effects in the Early Days of Federal Reserve Forward Guidance, published in the American Economic Review, provides new insights on how the nature of the FOMC's forward guidance shapes private sector expectations and hence the effectiveness of monetary policy communications. Kurt, congratulations once again. Let's give a round of applause. A few housekeeping items before we get started with our agenda. The conference is being recorded and is being live streamed on the board's website, federalreserve.gov, as well as the board's YouTube channel. And as I'm sure you've noticed, the press is here as well, so please bear that in mind. We will be taking questions during a few of our sessions today, and we'll have microphones around the room to facilitate that process. We will not be taking any questions online, however. If you do have any questions about anything related to today's conference, or just have questions about where to go, please find any of my colleagues around the room who are wearing a white lanyard. Lastly, I want to offer my sincere gratitude to the presenters and panelists for their participation in today's conference, and to my team and partners from around the board who have helped make today's event possible and helped make it a success. So thank you all. And before we move on, we have a message from someone who knows firsthand the iconic nature and contributions of Tomas Laubach.
Good morning. I regret that other business prevents me from being with you, but I did want to add my voice to those who today are remembering Thomas Laubach and his contributions as researcher and public servant. The establishment of this conference is a very worthy tribute to a remarkable economist and a remarkable person. I had the good fortune of working closely with Tomas, first during my time as vice chair. Back then, I was looking for an advisor to help me develop and communicate some of my thinking about monetary policy. He came highly, in fact, lavishly recommended. I knew his work, of course, on inflation targeting and the natural rate of interest, but I didn't yet really know him. The person who showed up in my office was bursting with ideas, suggestions, and enthusiasm. As an accomplished economist, he'd already made important contributions and begun a career as an academic, which he surely would have continued to great success. But Tomas had also spent time at the Fed, and he longed to be back in the arena doing the important work the Fed does on behalf of the public. In working with Tomas, I found that he possessed a rare combination of penetrating, insightful analysis, superlative technical skill, and the ability to explain complex concepts to anyone. One of our projects was to advance the work on monetary policy communication that began in earnest under Chairman Bernanke. The FOMC had adopted a 2% inflation target and a statement laying out the longer-run goals of monetary policy. And it might have seemed like the revolution in communications was over, but I didn't think so. And one of the first speeches that Tomas worked on with me sent the very clear message that attention to communications would remain a top priority. In a speech that was about the need for policymakers to speak clearly, Tomas's ability to write clearly and explain things like optimal control in an accessible way was of great value to me and to the Fed. Later, as the director of the Division of Monetary Affairs, Tomas helped me as chair in the task of making the difficult judgments about when to lift rates off the effective lower bound and in beginning normalization of the balance sheet. I know he played a big role also in the huge amount of research and other work that went into the FOMC's Monetary Policy Framework Review. Many of you here at this first Laubach conference had the benefit that I did, knowing and working alongside Tomas.
Yeah, we're gonna put it into What is this dude talking about?
Hello, my fellow Degens. What's up? Welcome to the channel. Hey, before we get into today's video, will you do me a favor? If you like this content and you like my Cybertruck in the background, will you not only like, but subscribe to this channel? Because right now I have like no subscriber growth. And I think I've been talking to other YouTubers and they're like, yeah, oh, Drip. Yeah, this channel used to be the Drip Farm. Now it's the, what's the name of this channel? The Rug Farm, something like that. But yeah, I was in Drip like a long I got in. I have a $2,000 account. Now this was a sponsored play. Look at this. I started on the 23rd, so that's 3 days ago. It expires on the 8th. That means it's a 10-day play. Our trading package covers a 10-day period with daily payouts and has an impressive daily profit of 12%. Can you imagine that? 12%. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to show you guys what I did. You just make a deposit here, and then your money's working for you. You click on whatever coin you want to withdraw. So in this case, it's TRC for me. TRC Tether 248 is what's in there. That $8 is a referral bonus. So I click withdraw, and it says, yep, submit. Bam. So I'm just doing that every day for 10 days. So I asked the people behind this project, how is your project doing? They're like, oh, we really believe we're going to go way beyond C12. And I asked them that today. So they're saying things look strong, things look healthy. I really do hope that this one lasts. So far, so good. We're in day 3. But, you know, as always, risk capital guys, and don't come at me because I have no idea how long these projects last. And Poradex is the name of this one. So it's a 10-day play, pays 12% a day. So what does that mean? It means at the end of 10 days, I'm hoping to make 20% on my money. Now, if this is legit, Charles Schwab would be all up on it, right? You know, it'd be Goldman Sachs' finest hour. Well, this is DeFi. I don't know the devs. So whether they're trading, whether they're doing whatever they want to claim they're doing with this, yeah, it is. Just relax, okay? Risk capital only. But I know most of you guys follow me on this channel and subscribe. You guys get that. So this is kind of a crazy DeFi play. And as an example, you never know what project is going to last. Like C12 lasted 209 days. These guys are saying they're trying to be the next C12. Will they? Who knows? But so far so good. So that's great to see. Then you've got other DeFi projects like this. Boom. Drip, guys. I've been in this thing for how long? And it's still paying. So say what you want, man. Thank you, Forex. Thank you for everybody. And honestly, I should be thanking people who become the exit liquidity. Every time you cash out of any of these Ponzonomic projects, you're taking someone else's money. How dare you. So we're all stealing from each other. You go, I've never stolen. Have you ever played DeFi? Yeah, if it's in Ponzonomics, then we're just swapping out. Okay, that's the way this thing works. And obviously, I did really well building a big team. Not one person clicked my referral link because they just want to help me out. No, they wanted to get in Drip. There was huge momentum for this. But look at this is why I'm covering this today. This movement right here, all the way from 19 cents to 23. That's a big jump. Not sure what's causing that, but as you can see, you know, it's kind of interesting. So tell me what I should do. Should I be holding my Drip for this new development that Forex has been talking about for over a year now, or should I just unload? Because right now I've got $6,000. That could be a nice Airbnb for a month in Miami with me and my dog. Maybe find a wife. And if I did, I'd have to invite Forex to the wedding. So this is an example of a DeFi project, guys. That it lasts. It got momentum. Thousands of people joined it, and it's still alive today. Now, does it have outside revenue coming in? No. So what does that tell you? It tells you it's a Ponzonomic play. So go in. You know, on your own accord. So this one's been well over a year old. I don't even know the exact date. You got this one that's only 3 days, and these are the opposite ends of the spectrum. This is DeFi. Now, I saw the pre-sale for what was it? We did pre-sales with Lamano and then pre-sales with Kirk. The pre-sale with Kirk is ongoing, guys. You can get into it right now. This is what I'm talking about right here. This is James Pelton is going over to Malaysia to check this out. Here he is. Web3 meets healthcare and passive income. So you got Kirk. The sale is right now. Live AMA, July 26, 4 a.m. Get all your questions answered. So definitely join their Discord. Check out this if you're interested in high gamble play. Obviously Drip. You know, we're gonna keep monitoring it. But look, if I accumulated 26,000 Drip, that means I've been not selling for a really, really long time. And I'm hoping just for price movement. I'm playing the game against you guys again with Ponzonomics. That's the way this game is played. There is no outside revenue coming in. So that's it for this video. There's my old bumper. I know you guys have been asking for the new one, but hey, follow me on Instagram. I just updated my PDF of all my plays. All you gotta do is message me. Links in the bio at sold by seller, and we'll send you that modern or updated PDF. All right, I love you guys, and play safe out there.
That might be on both.